The German Shepherd stopped dead in the middle of the hotel lobby, not slowed, not hesitated. Stopped every trained muscle in his body locked up at once, like something invisible had reached down and grabbed him by the collar. His handler, a decorated staff sergeant named Marcus Webb, yanked the leash twice. Nothing. Pulled it a third time harder. The dog didn't budge a single inch. What he did instead made 50 people go completely silent. He turned his massive head toward the far corner of the lobby, toward a man in a worn grey uniform pushing a luggage cart across the marble floor. An old man, a quiet man, the kind of man nobody in that room had looked at twice all morning, and then the dog sat down. Not the stiff, alert sit of a military working animal on assignment. Something else entirely, something slower, something that looked almost like reverence. His ears dropped, his body lowered, his chin angled downward toward the polished floor. Staff Sergeant Webb had worked with military K-9s for 11 years. He had deployed twice with them. He had trained alongside some of the most decorated working dogs in the country, and he had never once, not in 11 years, seen anything like what he was watching right now. The dog was not confused. He was not distracted. He was not reacting to a threat. He was paying his respects. "Zeus," Webb said, his voice tight and controlled. "Zeus, heel." The dog turned and looked at him, then looked back at the old man across the lobby. Looked at Webb again. Then he did something that Webb would spend the next several years trying to explain to anyone who would listen. He lifted his right paw off the ground and held it there, perfectly still, aimed in the direction of the man with the luggage cart. A woman standing near the check-in desk pressed her hand against her mouth. A retired police officer visiting from Phoenix grabbed the arm of the man standing next to him. A little girl sitting on a lobby bench tugged on her grandmother's sleeve and pointed, but no words came out. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, because across the lobby, the old man had stopped pushing his cart. He had gone completely still, and when he slowly turned around and saw the dog, his weathered face did something nobody in that room expected. He stood up straighter, not the way a person straightens when they're startled. The way a soldier stands when called to attention. Spine aligned, chin level, shoulders squared. His hands dropped to his sides with the practiced stillness of a man who had stood this way 10,000 times before. The two of them, the scarred German shepherd and the forgotten old man, stared at each other across 60 feet of marble flooring, and nobody in that lobby had any idea why. The Hargrove Grand Hotel sat at the corner of 5th and Madison in downtown Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place that smelled like fresh flowers and quiet money. The carpets were thick and dark red. The chandeliers dripped with crystal. The check-in staff wore pressed black uniforms and called guests by name before they reached the front desk. Nobody called the porter by name, not the guests. Anyway, his name was Eugene Briggs. He was 71 years old, and he had worked the morning shift at the Hargrove Grand for going on 9 years. He arrived every weekday at 6 in the morning and stayed until 2 in the afternoon. He pushed luggage carts and held elevator doors and carried bags up staircases when the service elevator was full. He stood outside in January rain to flag down cabs for guests who couldn't be bothered to wait 30 seconds. He smiled at every person who walked past him, even the ones who looked through him like he was part of the furniture. Most of them did. Eugene was not a tall man. He was lean in the way that older working men get lean, not from the gym, but from decades of constant labor. His hair was white and cropped close to his head. His face was deeply lined, the kind of face that had spent serious time outdoors in serious weather. His hands were large and rough, and moved with a quiet deliberateness that suggested a man who had learned long ago not to waste motion. He wore his grey uniform the way some men wear a suit, buttoned cleanly, collar straight, name tag centered. He kept his shoes polished, something his supervisor, a 29-year-old assistant manager named Derek Shields, had actually laughed about once. "Nobody's going to notice your shoes, Eugene." Eugene had not responded. He polished them anyway, every morning before the shift started. Eugene lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Columbus. The second bedroom had been empty for 6 years, since his daughter moved to Portland with her family. He called her on Sundays. He kept her children's drawings taped to the refrigerator and updated them whenever new ones arrived in the mail. He cooked his own meals. He tended a small container garden on the balcony. Tomatoes and basil mostly. He read hardback history books and watched the evening news and went to bed at 9:30. He did not talk much about the years before the hotel. The other porters, the younger men and women on the shift, liked Eugene well enough. He helped when help was needed and never complained when the work ran long. But he kept a certain distance, a quiet perimeter that nobody quite knew how to cross. There was something in his eyes when the lobby got very loud, a brief flicker, something that came and went so fast you could almost convince yourself you'd imagined it. The assistant manager Derek did not like him. Not openly, not in any way he would have admitted out loud, but it was clear in a dozen small ways. In the way he scheduled Eugene for the heaviest cart runs, in the way he spoke to him slightly too slowly, as if Eugene had trouble understanding basic English, in the way he had told a group of younger porters within Eugene's earshot that the hotel was a young person's game and that some people ought to know when they've aged out of a position. Eugene had heard every word of that. He'd kept pushing the cart. That morning, the morning everything changed, the hotel was hosting the Ohio Regional Law Enforcement and Military Working Dog Symposium. It was an annual event that brought handlers, trainers, and active military canine units from across the Midwest. The ballroom had been set up since the previous evening. Flags had been placed along the corridor leading from the main entrance. A small outdoor demonstration had already taken place on the side lawn, drawing a sizable crowd of hotel guests and passers-by who had gathered to watch the dogs work. 3 military German shepherds had been on display that morning. Big, magnificent animals with clean coats and sharp eyes and the kind of focused energy that makes ordinary people step back instinctively. Their handlers walked them through the lobby in formation just after 10 o'clock, heading toward the ballroom for the indoor portion of the program. That was when the first dog stopped. That was when Zeus stopped. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb was not a man who rattled easily. He was 34 years old, a former combat handler who had done 2 tours overseas and come back with a bad knee and a deeply held conviction that military working dogs were among the most remarkable creatures on earth. He trained dogs now, had been doing it for 4 years, and he understood their behavior in a way that most people simply could not, which was precisely why what Zeus was doing made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Webb crouched down beside the dog, keeping his voice low and level. "Zeus, what is it, boy? What do you have?" Zeus did not look at him. His eyes stayed fixed across the lobby. The other 2 handlers had stopped walking. Their dogs, a female shepherd named Kira and a younger male named Atlas, had both turned in the same direction, though neither had broken stance the way Zeus had. They were watching, alert, ears forward, reading the situation. Webb followed Zeus's line of sight. He saw the old man with the cart. He saw the way the old man was standing. And something clicked in the back of his brain, something he couldn't yet put words to. He stood up slowly, keeping the leash loose. "Okay," he said quietly, more to himself than to the dog. Okay, he didn't pull the leash again. Instead, he stood there, letting Zeus hold the moment, watching the old man the way a person watches someone they're trying to place. Trying to figure out where they've seen that face before. He hadn't seen that face before. He was sure of it. But Zeus had never reacted to a stranger this way. Never the assistant manager, Derek Shields, materialized from somewhere near the front desk, his face tight with the particular anxiety of a man who manages things for a living and is currently watching something very unmanageable unfold in his lobby. "I'm so sorry about this," Derek said, moving toward Webb with his hands slightly raised like a man approaching a car accident. "He's one of our porters. I can have him removed to the service area if the dog needs more space." Webb looked at him. "He's not bothering the dog." "Well, no, but the dog seems to be reacting," Webb said. "Yeah," he paused. "Has that man worked here long?" Derek blinked. "Eugene? 9 years, I think. He's just a porter." "Why?" Webb didn't answer right away. He was watching Zeus again. The dog had not moved. His paw was still raised, ever so slightly, off the marble. "What's his last name?" Webb asked. Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't know. He had to go look it up. Eugene Briggs had started walking toward them. He did it slowly, with the measured pace of a man who has learned over many years not to move quickly in the presence of something that might startle. He left the luggage cart where it was and crossed the lobby with his hands loose at his sides, his eyes steady, his face carrying an expression that the woman near the check-in desk later described as someone who had been waiting a very long time for something and had finally stopped, being surprised by it. He stopped about 10 feet from the dog. Zeus made a sound then, not a bark, not a whine, something in between, a low, soft sound deep in his chest that several people standing nearby said they felt more than heard. Eugene Briggs looked at the dog for a long moment. Then he looked at Webb. "What's his name?" Eugene asked. His voice was quiet but clear, with a steadiness that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with discipline. "Zeus," Webb said. Eugene nodded once, very slowly. "What's his line?" Webb frowned. "His line? Who trained him? Where does he come from?" Webb stared at him. This was not the kind of question civilians asked. This was not even the kind of question most law enforcement handlers asked. This was the question of someone who understood how the lineage of a military working dog actually worked, who understood that these animals were bred and trained through specific programs, specific kennels, specific handlers, going back generations. "His line goes back to Fort Benning," Webb said carefully. "Program was restructured about 12 years ago. He comes out of a direct training lineage from a dog named Ranger." Eugene Briggs went very still, the kind of still that isn't stillness at all, the kind that costs something. "Ranger," Eugene repeated, very quietly, like the name was made of something fragile. Webb watched his face. "You know that name?" Eugene did not answer right away. He lowered himself slowly, one knee at a time, until he was kneeling on the marble floor in his gray porter's uniform at eye level with the German shepherd. Zeus took one step forward, then another. He covered the distance between them with deliberate, measured steps. He stopped 6 inches from Eugene's face. He pressed his broad forehead gently against Eugene's forehead and held it there. The lobby was so quiet, you could hear the crystal moving in the chandelier overhead. Eugene Briggs closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were wet. Stories like this one, quiet moments of recognition between forgotten people and the animals who never forget, are the reason this channel exists. There are men and women all across this country whose service lives inside them long after anyone else remembers. We think their stories deserve to be told. Derek Shields came back from the front desk with Eugene's employment file held at arm's length, the way someone holds a thing they're not sure they understand. He handed it to Webb without a word. Webb opened it. The emergency contact was a daughter in Portland, Oregon. The prior employment section had a single entry before the hotel. It simply read, United States Army, 1973 to 1994, 21 years. Webb looked up from the file. He looked at Eugene, who was still kneeling on the marble with the dog's head pressed against his own. He looked back down at the paper. 21 years, Webb said aloud. One of the other handlers, a woman named Carla Diaz, who had been standing back near the corridor with Kira, stepped forward. Ask him his MOAS, she said quietly. Webb glanced at her, then back at Eugene. Sir, can I ask what your military occupational specialty was? Eugene opened his eyes. He leaned back slightly from the dog, just enough to look at Webb directly. 11 kilo, he said. First 8 years. Then I retrained. Retrained to what? Webb asked. The corner of Eugene's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. 31 kilo, he said. The other handlers knew immediately. Carla Diaz inhaled sharply. The third handler, a younger man named Torres, looked from his colleagues to Eugene and back again. Wait, Torres said. Military working dog handler? Eugene nodded once. For how long? Carla asked. 13 years, Eugene said. He stood back up then, carefully, with the stiffness of a man whose knees had done a lot of hard miles over 7 decades. Zeus stayed close, shoulder pressed against Eugene's thigh, the same way a trained dog stays close to its handler. The lobby watched. Derek Shields had gone pale. The symposium coordinator, a retired colonel named Patricia Holt, had been on her way from the ballroom to the front desk when she stopped in the corridor and stared at the scene unfolding 40 feet away. She was a compact, precise woman in her early 60s, with a career's worth of military bearing still visible in the way she stood. She walked toward them without hesitation. What's happening? She asked Webb quietly. Our dog identified him, Webb said. He's a retired handler. Army. 13 years with MWD units. Colonel Holt looked at Eugene. What was your last assignment? Eugene met her eyes. Fort Carson, he said. Before that, 2 tours in Germany. Before that, a deployment I'm not at liberty to discuss in a hotel lobby. Holt studied him for a moment. What was the last dog you handled? Something shifted across Eugene's face. Not pain exactly, something that lived just past pain, in the territory people only arrive at after they've carried something long enough. Ranger, he said. The word landed in the center of the lobby like a stone dropped into still water. Webb looked from Holt to Eugene and back again. Ranger, he repeated slowly. That's the dog Zeus descends from. I know, Eugene said simply. How do you know that? Eugene reached into the chest pocket of his uniform, the small breast pocket that most people use for nothing more than a pen. He removed something small and dark and placed it in Webb's open hand. It was a dog tag, not a human dog tag. A military working dog identification tag, the kind issued to registered K9 assets. Small, oval, worn smooth at the edges. Webb turned it over and read the engraving MWD Ranger, U.S. Army, K9 unit, Fort Carson, so below the unit information. Someone had scratched 4 additional characters into the metal by hand. Not official, personal. The kind of thing a handler does quietly on their own time. The letters spelled a word, home. Webb's hand closed around the tag. He looked at Eugene Briggs, standing there in his gray hotel porter's uniform, hands clasped in front of him, eyes dry now, but carrying something enormous behind them. Ranger was your dog, Webb said. It was not a question. For 9 years, Eugene said, before he was retired to the breeding program. Before his line produced the dogs you're working with today. Carla Diaz pressed the back of her hand against her lips. Torres turned away for a moment, the way men do when they need a second. Sir? Webb said, and his voice had changed entirely, the professional crispness of it replaced by something quieter and harder to name. "Sir, why didn't you say anything? When you saw the dogs this morning, why didn't you tell someone who you were?" Eugene looked at him steadily. "I'm a porter," he said. Nobody was asking. The story of Eugene Briggs did not stay inside the Hargrove Grand Hotel for long. Colonel Holt spent 40 minutes on the phone that afternoon. By the time the symposium's afternoon session ended, 3 things had already happened. A records researcher at the Army Human Resources Command had pulled Eugene's full service file. A Veterans Affairs liaison had been notified. And a retired brigadier general named Howard Marsh, who happened to be a keynote speaker at the symposium and had overseen the Fort Carson K-9 program in the late 1980s, had been quietly pulled aside in the ballroom and told what was happening in the lobby. Marsh walked into the lobby without his speech notes, without his introduction, without any of the prepared remarks he had spent 2 weeks writing. He walked straight to Eugene Briggs. The 2 men looked at each other for a moment in the way that men look at each other when they share something that doesn't have civilian words. "Eugene," Marsh said. His voice was rough. He had known this man 30 years ago, had signed off on commendations for him twice, had written a letter in 1991 that he was not sure had ever reached the right person. "General," Eugene said. "I read the commendations again last year," Marsh said, "during the program review. The work you did with Ranger during the Grafenwöhr deployment. The incident in December of 1989. He paused. "That incident has never been properly recognized. We failed you on that." Eugene did not answer. "There were 17 soldiers in that convoy," Marsh said quietly. "The records show your dog identified the device before the lead vehicle crossed the mark. They show you put yourself between the vehicle and the blast perimeter to give Ranger room to work." He stopped. "The records show that, but nobody outside that program ever saw it." "I didn't do it for recognition," Eugene said. "I know that," Marsh said. "That's exactly why it should have been recognized." Across the lobby, Zeus sat calmly beside Webb's leg. His eyes were still on Eugene, had not left Eugene since the moment they had first locked onto him. "Think about the veterans in your own life, the ones who came home and quietly went back to ordinary work, ordinary routines, who never asked for a ceremony or a mention or even a thank you. This story is for them, and for the ones who are no longer here to hear it. What happened in the Hargrove Grand that evening was not planned. Nobody sent out invitations. Nobody made announcements. Colonel Holt simply told the symposium attendees what had been discovered. She told it plainly, without theater, the way military people tell things. An Army veteran, 21 years of service, 13 years as a military working dog handler, 2 deployments in Germany during a critical period of Cold War operations, a commendation that was never properly delivered. Working in this hotel for 9 years as a porter, quiet, invisible to most of the people walking past him every day, the attendees were military handlers, trainers, law enforcement K-9 officers. They understood, in a way that required no additional explanation, exactly what Eugene Briggs had given and exactly what had never been given back. They filed out of the ballroom in a group. They gathered in the lobby. Eugene was still on shift. He had gone back to his cart after the afternoon's events had settled down. He was near the main entrance, helping an elderly couple with their bags. Doing the thing he did every day, the unremarkable, necessary work that kept the hotel moving and that nobody stopped to notice. When he turned around, he found himself looking at approximately 60 people, standing in a loose formation across the lobby. Derek Shields was standing off to the side, very still, wearing an expression that the woman at the check-in desk later described as a man realizing something about himself. That he did not particularly like General Marsh stepped forward from the group. He was holding something, a small velvet box, the kind that opens on a hinge. He had made a phone call that afternoon. Someone had driven 40 minutes to make sure what was inside that box arrived before the evening was over. He opened it and held it out. Inside was a service commendation medal. The commendation that Eugene's records showed had been authorized in 1990 and had somehow, in the machinery of the military and the movement of years, never made its way to the man it belonged to. Eugene looked at it for a long moment without moving. "This is overdue," Marsh said, "by about 34 years. The Army recognizes your service, your courage, and your sacrifice. And every person in this room is here because we want you to know that your work, with Ranger and with every dog you trained alongside, is still out there. It's in Zeus. It's in the dogs that came from Ranger's line. The work didn't disappear. It never disappeared." Eugene's jaw moved, once tightening and releasing. He reached out and took the box with both hands. He held it the way men hold things they were not sure they would ever receive. 60 people raised their hands in salute. Zeus, standing beside Webb at the front of the group, did not move. His right paw came up off the ground, held steady. Eugene looked at the dog, then Eugene Briggs, 71 years old. Gray uniform and polished shoes, and 34 years of quiet service that most of the world had never seen, raised his right hand and returned the salute. The woman near the check-in desk was crying openly. She later said she had worked at the hotel for 12 years and had spoken to Eugene hundreds of times and had never once asked him a single question about his life. She said she was going to think about that for a long time. Eugene Briggs did not leave the hotel. He came in the following Monday at 6 in the morning, same as always. Collar straight, shoes polished, name tag centered. But something had changed in the lobby. It is difficult to explain exactly what. The air in a place can shift when a truth enters it that was not there before. The check-in staff knew his name now, knew it the way you know the name of someone you respect. The bellhops on the younger shift started calling him Sarge, not to be cute, but because one of them had read the article that ran in the Columbus Dispatch the weekend after the symposium, and because the name felt true. Derek Shields resigned 4 months later. He had been offered a position at another hotel across town. He told people it was a promotion. The woman at the check-in desk, whose name was Loretta, had her own private opinion about his reasons, but she kept it to herself. General Marsh sent a letter. It was long and handwritten on official stationery. Eugene read it twice, folded it carefully, and kept it in the breast pocket of his uniform for 3 days before he took it home. On a Sunday afternoon in October, with the light coming in long and gold across his kitchen table, he called his daughter in Portland. He talked to her for an hour and a half, which was unusual. Normally they talked for 30 minutes. She asked him what had happened. He told her the whole story. He had never told her any of it before, any of his service, any of Ranger, any of the deployment in 1989 that he had carried in the back of his memory for 34 years. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Dad," she said finally, "why didn't you ever tell me?" "Nobody asked," he said. She flew out to visit him 3 weeks later and stayed for 10 days. She brought the grandchildren. They slept in the second bedroom that had been empty for 6 years. Eugene made his tomato and basil pasta 3 nights in a row because the youngest grandchild requested it each time. On the last evening before they flew home, they sat on the balcony as the sun went down over Columbus, and his daughter held his hand the way she had when she was a little girl. She told him she was proud of him. He said thank you. And then, after a moment, he said that it was enough, that having someone know was enough, that he had spent a long time not needing anyone to know, and that the not needing had cost him something he hadn't quite named until recently. He thought about Ranger. He thought about the 13 years of mornings that had started with the sound of a dog's breathing, steady and close. He thought about what it meant for that breathing to still be somewhere in the world, passed forward through a lineage of dogs into an animal named Zeus, who had walked into a hotel lobby on an ordinary Tuesday morning and refused to keep moving until the truth had a chance to surface. Some things do not disappear just because they are forgotten by the people around them. Some loyalty outlasts the forgetting entirely. Eugene still works at the Hargrove Grand. He will tell you it is good work, honest work, and he does not say that the way people say things that aren't true. He means it. Zeus was brought back to the hotel once, 6 months later, for a brief visit that Colonel Holt and Sergeant Webb organized together. When Eugene walked out of the service corridor and into the lobby, the dog saw him from 40 feet away, and his tail began moving before his handler had taken 2 steps. Eugene knelt down on the marble, same as before. The dog pressed his forehead against Eugene's and held it there in the quiet, unhurried way of creatures who do not need to explain what they mean. The lobby stopped. It always stopped when something true is happening in the middle of it. Loretta's at the front desk pressed her hand against her heart. The chandeliers moved gently overhead, and Eugene Briggs, who had lived most of his life being invisible in the middle of rooms full of people, stayed right there on the floor for as long as the dog wanted to hold the moment. He did not rush it. He did not look around to see who was watching. He just stayed. The loyalty was still there. It had always been there, patient as stone, waiting in a lineage of dogs that had carried it forward from one set of paws to the next, through the years and the forgetting, all the way back to him. It always finds its way home. That is the thing about loyalty. No matter how long it takes, no matter how many years pass between the giving and the return, it always finds its way home. If you have ever known a veteran who came home quietly, who went back to ordinary life without ceremony or recognition, who carried their service in the back of their eyes while the world walked past, this story is for you. And if you have ever loved a dog who seemed to know something about you that nobody else did, who stayed close on the hard days and pressed their warm weight against you when the words ran out, you already understand everything. Eugene Briggs and Zeus shared in that lobby without a single word between them. There is a question this story leaves with us, one that feels worth sitting with for a moment. Think of someone in your life whose service or sacrifice went unrecognized, a parent, a grandparent, a neighbor who came home from a war and went quietly back to work. Did you ever ask them about it? Did anyone? Tell us in the comments, and tell us where you are watching from. These conversations matter more than you might think. If this story moved you, a simple like helps more people find it, and that means more veterans' stories reaching the people who need to hear them. Share this one with someone who believes in honoring the quiet heroes, the ones who never asked for the ceremony but deserved it anyway. There are thousands of Eugene Briggses out there, men and women who served faithfully, who came home and kept working, who polished their shoes every morning out of a dignity that had nothing to do with whether anyone noticed. We are here to notice. We are here to remember. And we are grateful you are here with us. K9 Heroes Uncovered, because every bond deserves to be remembered.